All right, welcome. Welcome. Music working? It is. Awesome. All right. Hey, Vessel. It's nice to see you again. No, really, it is always is nice to see you. How goes? I hope you are doing well. Um, okay. Yeah. So, we have another session of Tabletop Workshop. Yay! Of designing RPGs, talking about the design of RPGs, of games in general sometimes. Um, and today I wanted to talk about something more fundamental, something that I may have referenced before, and then I talked about way back when, uh, in the earlier times of the stream, when I still had a Talk Tuesday segment, for those who still remember that one. Um, okay. But I realized I hadn't talked about it yet in this format. And it is it's not necessary to understand this in order to design games. But it is very helpful to understand what is going on when you are designing a game, right? It is some form of more fundamental abstract theory, kind of like and or not kind of like it is tied to the idea of what even is fun. There's been a lot of good research on what even is fun, why we as human beings play, what is play, right? The act of playing. And by understanding these things, that can help us guide our design, right? And make sure that we don't lose sight of the fun when we are designing games, because that's kind of what games are for, right? There are many different types of fun, obviously. Um, but again, that has all been researched. There are books written on it and scientific papers written on it and such. That is not what we're going to talk about today, even though the model I wish to introduce today, the largest part of that model is talking about what is fun, what kinds of fun are there, right? So, what do I wish to talk about today? That is the MDA model. Oh my goodness, my fingers are all weak right now. It must be too cold. Sorry about that. I was trying to hold the pen to write, and then the pen was just slipping through all my fingers. Oh my goodness. I hope I'll be able to write today. Okay, so the MDA model, right? And this model is very interesting in what it shows us, what it shows for not the job of game designers, but the also not the ability of game designers, but like the edge of how far we can design. This will make sense in a moment when I talk about what this actually means. All right. So what does MDA even stand for? It's obviously an acronym. So MDA stands for the parts that lead from the design to the play. M stands for mechanics. So mechanics, let me write that a little bit further to this side. Mechanics are quite literally game mechanics, right? All of the moving bits and pieces that we put into a game, the systems, the structures, the rules, the uh, depending on what medium you're working on, right? The coding or the pieces that you put into the game, all of that. This is the mechanics. Right? And a lot of the time when we talk about game design, we talk about, oh, what kinds of mechanics are there? What kinds of mechanics does the game have? This is literally just that. And then the D stands for dynamics. And dynamics is the emergent things that come out when people actually engage with the mechanics. It can come from various mechanics working together, or it can simply come from a mechanic being used, and that creates something new, right? Um, it creates ways of playing and engaging with the game. That is not just, say, rolling a die. Rolling a die and reading the number is a mechanic, but the way the mechanic is shaped might change the way people engage with this rolling the die mechanic. Right? I've talked about things like if you set difficulties really high and if consequences are dire every time you roll the die, then people will naturally avoid using this mechanic. And this avoidance is a dynamic that emerges from how you have designed your game. And then the A stands for aesthetics. And this is just a fancy word for fun, for gameplay experience, right? It's supposed to encompass all of these nebulous concepts when we sit down to play a game. What do we feel? What do we experience? What happens to us emotionally? Right? What kind of mood does the game create? What kind of fun does the game create? And all of that is aesthetics. Right? So that's it's not quote unquote just, right? It's not the art or the visual design or sound design or so of a game. That can also contribute to the gameplay experience, definitely. But it's much more than that. It's the actual experience itself that people feel when they are sitting down to play this game. Right? Now, what makes this model so interesting or so useful for us? When you are a player, a consumer, right, who wishes to play a game, you look at the game from this end. This is supposed to be an I guess, right? So you look at it from this end, right? You look at the aesthetics first. You look at, oh, is this a kind of game that I would like to play? Is this does this game look cool? Does this game look fun? And we judge that usually by very nebulous metrics, right? Because it's similar to other games I've played, and that means I will enjoy it. Or I get to be Batman, right? Um, or oh, this game makes me think. It has a lot of puzzles. Or I don't know. The game has a strong story and interesting characters. Whatever, right? Or the game looks really pretty. All sorts of things. Um, genre kind of falls into this as well. That's how we try to categorize different types of experiences, right? Which is why genre is ever shifting. So as a player, you look at it like this from this end. But as a designer, you are standing on this end, right? You only have control over the mechanics. That is the only thing you can do. Whereas as a player, you are looking mostly at the aesthetics, right? And that is something that we have to understand when we design a game. Sure, as a designer, we need to think about the players. And that's why this model the breakdown this model does is very, very good. As a designer, we have to think about the players. We have to think about the kind of fun we want to provide, right? So, the kind of gameplay experience / fun the game should provide. And we need to think about that. We need to look at that and go, okay, I want to make a game that makes players experience this. Right. And you need to make a decision. You can't really have a game that tries to please everyone, because then the game will please no one. Just look at Starfield. Right? That is one of the core things that a lot of analyses there, hours upon hours upon hours of analyses of the game. What exactly went wrong with Starfield? And when you actually look at what the designers tried to do, besides the old engine, besides the technical limitations, the design intention was eventually, we want to please everyone. We want to make every aspect of the game optional. A line from an analysis video I watched that was very good was, they made space in a space game optional. Right? And because they didn't want to force the player, so to speak, to experience anything specific, so the game just delivers nothing, really. Right? The whole game is just kind of, you can, but you don't have to. It's like, okay, then why am I playing this? Some people find that fun, right? There are definitely people who enjoy Starfield. Sure, awesome. But they are very likely the minority. And right, it's like, I'm playing a space game, but then I don't have to engage with the game. The game is not telling me to engage with it on its own terms. And so when you are looking at the aesthetics of your game design, you need to say, all right, what kind of a game am I trying to make here? How should the player engage with this? What kind of a fun should the player have when playing this? And this thing here informs the design goals, right? Because this is the end product, the end user experience, really, right? But as a designer, the only thing we have control over is the mechanics. We cannot make a game and then tell the player, have this kind of fun. We can only craft the mechanics of a game and hope that through the engagement that happens to the mechanics of our game and the resulting experience that comes from it, the player will have the kind of fun that we envisioned them to have. Right? And that's something to keep in mind. You can't tell the player to play the game in a certain way. That would be manipulating the dynamics. And even less, you cannot tell the player to have a certain experience when playing the game. That would be trying to influence the aesthetics directly. And that's something a surprising number of professional game designers don't understand. When you read replies to negative feedback, you may have heard of the. I'm not talking about any specific game right now, but there are stories, there are or like videos and such about people, game designers who made a game that has gotten negative feedback, and then the way they reply to that negative feedback is, you don't understand my game, or you don't know how to have fun, you are playing the wrong way, you are doing gaming wrong, or any of that sort of thing. And that's utterly ridiculous. That's utterly ridiculous. Right? If you want players to solve puzzles, right, as a game and have to think a lot about various solutions, maybe lateral thinking and such, don't give them a football and a pitch. Right? That's football, I mean soccer ball. Don't give them a soccer ball and a field. That will lead to gameplay, yes, but that will lead to radically different gameplay than, say, a Sudoku would. Right? So if you want players to solve Sudoku or have an experience like solving Sudoku and engaging their puzzle solving brain, don't give them a soccer ball and a field. And because then your mechanics are just saying, yo, I am this kind of game, and then players play this kind of game, right? They look at the soccer ball, they look at the field, and they start throwing or kicking it around or whatever. That's the dynamics, and then they have a certain kind of fun with that. That's the aesthetics. And then you as a designer come along and say, no, 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 you're supposed to solve the puzzle. It's like, what puzzle? You didn't even give me one. Right? Your mechanics don't have anything of that sort. And you see that quite a bit, actually, when certain designers reply to negative feedback that way. In fact, I think that also happened with Starfield. That's by far not the only example, but I think that also happened with Starfield, where the designers were literally telling players, "You don't know how to play our game. You are playing our game wrong." No, no, that's not how this works. So, as a designer, right? Essentially, uh, the way players, or not the way, the most intuitive slash direct slash obvious or whatever, right? Some word among those. Engagement, right, which is the dynamics, with the mechanics, with the game mechanics, should hopefully lead to the experience the designer envisioned. Okay, but that's not easy. That's definitely not easy. Right? You can only manipulate the gears. You cannot manipulate what happens once the gears start running, and you can definitely not manipulate the end product that comes out, right? The experience that comes out from the whole machinery. Um, so we need to learn about various ways of how the mechanics can shape the fun and what types of mechanics can do that and what to expect from certain mechanics. Again, it's not always possible to expect everything. A lot of this is just knowing your tool set, right? What kinds of mechanics exist, what we can do with them, how they might shape gameplay, and just design experience, right? But there's always something unpredictable. Think of speed running, for example. Speed running was when it first came about, and then for some time afterwards, it was never really envisioned to be a thing. Right? Speedrunning is relatively recent. And for those who don't know, speedrunning is essentially just you take a video game and you try to beat that video game in the fastest time possible. Like literally you start a stopwatch as you hit start game. You play the game, and at the end, when you're done, you hit the stopwatch again, and then you see what time you did, like you had. It's a race, really, and there's like the speedrun community is quite big. Like they hold a lot. There's a lot of big events happening multiple times a year and such. But speedrunning was in no way intended. Games were not intended to be played this way. Nowadays, of course, with speedrunning being more entrenched in gaming, there are some game designers who deliberately think of speedrunning when designing their game. Some designers even design their game specifically for speedrunning, right? But those are the exception. Those are definitely the exception. Most people just design a game, and then speedrunners come along and say, I am going to change the way I engage with your game. Right? And I will have a completely different type of fun doing so. And as a game designer, you can't really say no in a way, because like what you need for speedrunning is extremely simple. The types of mechanics you need for speedrunning. Um, so essentially, the types of emergent dynamics. So essentially, speedrunning requires just a couple of things. The first thing is your game needs to be some kind of skill expression, right? It needs to show, like playing through it is some kind of skill, be it reactions, be it precise inputs, be it I don't know, just good tactical sense, be it memorization, be it anything, right? There's a lot of different ways skill can be expressed, and if your game has any sort of skill expression, that's already first point, first prerequisite qualified. The second, your game must have some sort of ending, either an actual ending in the game where you beat the final level, or you beat the last boss, or you beat the last puzzle, or collect the last item or whatever, and then game done. Or it must have some sort of structure, internal structure, where the people can agree on saying, no, this is where we will mark an ending. Right. And third, the game, speed must be a way to play the game, and speed must be it must be possible. There we go. It must be possible to improve on the speed aspect of the game through better play, through higher skill, right? So this would disqualify a game like Vampire Survivors, because if you play Vampire Survivors optimally, the game, a session, will last 30 minutes, right? And higher skill just means more consistently hitting that 30 minutes. But that doesn't reduce the time of the game, the length of the playthrough, right? So the length of the playthrough must be able to be shortened by better skill. That will also disqualify things like visual novels, where higher skill might be you click really quickly or something. There might be people who speedrun like that, but that's not really. At some point, you just go, yeah, whatever. I just sit here, click for 2 hours, and then all the text is done, and I've read through the entire visual novel. That's also not really a skill expression. But as you can see, these three things are all that's necessary, and they are very, very broad. A huge number of games fall into this, just by virtue of being a certain type of game, right? And like, skill expression is something that you find in a lot of games. An ending point, a natural ending point, is also something that you find in a lot of games, just because at some point the last level is done or the story is over or whatever. And in many games, better skill can lead to better times, shorter times. And that's all that's necessary. So if your mechanics in any way, shape, or form support these three prerequisites, your game can be speedrun. Right? And that is something you cannot really account for without completely breaking your design. You could, of course, try to design a game that cannot be speedrun. It's relatively trivial. Again, see Vampire Survivors. But like, most of the time, that's not even a factor that you consider in your design. And yet, players can always try to find new ways to play the game on, not obvious ways or not direct ways of engaging with the game and playing with the game, leading to a different type of fun. That's always possible. What I'm trying to say here is, as a designer, you should not concern yourself about that. Because if your mechanics naturally and intuitively lead to a certain type of engagement and a certain type of fun, and that is the type of fun you envisioned, then you have hit your design goals. Any other way some players might choose to play your game is not, to say it maybe harshly, not your responsibility. Right? So yeah, that's what I was trying to say here. So the point here is, very importantly, the whole intuitive or direct or obvious engagement here. If the fun can only be had, the fun that you wish people have can only be had by engaging in your game with your game in a non-intuitive way, then you designed your game wrong. Okay. So, um, let me take this bit and put it up here. And also, let me move this up a bit so that I can use the bottom half of this. Okay. All right. So, um, now at the end of the day, every single mechanic will shape or help contribute to shaping the the end result, the end experience, right? Like I said, if you have a dice mechanic, and we're talking about role playing games here, right? This applies to games in general, but now we're talking about role playing games specifically. So if you have a dice mechanic where um whenever your character attempts something difficult, you roll a six-sided die. On a six, your character succeeds. On a 1 to 5, your character dies. Um, that will lead to players never wanting to roll the dice. They will never attempt anything difficult in the entire game because because of the way the mechanic is set up, right? So, a very extreme example, right? This mechanic of roll a 1d6. On a 6, your character succeeds on a difficult task. On a 1 to 5, your character dies. Um, will lead to the dynamic of players avoiding this mechanic and the fun that comes out of it. Well, it kind of depends on the rest of what's going on in your game, right? If that is the only mechanic, then the game is probably not gonna be a lot of fun. Um, but you can see, like, from extreme examples are always nice to kind of illustrate a point like this. Um, so even a dice mechanic can shape the way your game is played and the type of fun players will have. So it is impossible to list everything and really to go into any type of possible mechanic and the possible effects that one have. This is why you playtest. This is why you playtest, because you have the mechanics, but you won't know what kind of effect these mechanics will conjure unless you actually use them and play with them, right? That being said, there are a handful of more obvious, more direct types of mechanics, categories of mechanics that um, categories, okay, of mechanics that more directly shape play. Right? And these are, in no particular order, reward mechanics, structures, gameplay loops, uh, player options, and then a bit more esoteric, or not esoteric, but like a bit uncommon Um, oh my goodness, I can no longer spell. Mandatory processes and negative design space. Okay. And we will go through these and look at what they are and how they shape play, and maybe look at some examples. So, let me open up a new canvas, or not canvas, a new layer. Come on. All right. So, reward mechanics. Hold on. Okay. So, reward mechanics are literally anything that rewards the players for certain actions that they take. Right? So, these are things like, actually, I can probably go here first. Yeah, I have enough space here. Okay, let me do this here. So, these are things like experience, gold, or other currencies. Or other kind of like in-game narrative-y rewards, like magic items or things like that. Meta currencies, right? In D&D, that would be inspiration. In many other games, that's whatever hero points or fate points or whatever action points, whatever you want to call them, right? So meta currencies. Those are or something like uh, how do I like recovery or or no, okay, I know how to phrase this. New abilities or the recovery. Oh my god, I can no longer spell. Okay, new or recovery. There we go. Of abilities. Right, leveling up. You gain new abilities. Everyone loves that. Resting. You get to use your abilities again. Everyone loves that. Right. So these are players essentially get paid. Hey yo, Awkward Pain. Hello. How are you doing? Nice to have you. How goes? Currently going through some example mechanics. Just checking in. Well, if it goes good, that's always good. But yeah, doing some RPG design. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask. Again, if anyone has any questions, always feel free to ask. This is not so much a lecture as it is just me talking about things, and then if questions come in, I'm happy to answer those as best as I can. But yeah, we're going through several types of mechanics right now that can help shape the way players engage with the game. Right. So reward mechanics are essentially they pay the players, right, on doing certain actions. Right? And pay is like they pay in like game things that are relevant in the game. Structures. Structures are gameplay systems that structure the pace and usage of. I should have written. I'm messing up the colors. Okay, hold on. Let me get rid of all of this. This should be in blue, because in green I have the examples somehow. Okay, so what are structures? Structures are things like a combat system. That is a structure. Um, a downtime system. Right. Several games have that, etc., etc. There are many different possibilities, and what they do is um, structure the pace and use of mechanics. Um, and they give a clear path. No, not a clear path, a clear next step. Right. So if you're inside a structure, you can just look at the structure, look at the mechanics, and say, and answer the question, what do I do next? Right. So in combat, for example, when it's your turn, or the GM can always look at, okay, there we've done this, what's next? Well, I go down the list and go to the next player, and it's that player's turn, and then what do you do? Well, I can always just attack a monster, for example. That is always something I can do, and I can engage with the mechanics in that way. Right. So that is very clear. It guides the players very clearly because it just tells them, here are the mechanics you can use, and if you use them, good things will happen typically, right? And you will be playing the game. Because this is a role-playing game that we're talking about, you are probably going to have other things that you can also do in a structure, things that the designer cannot account for. But as a designer, you can always say, all right, you have a default action. You always have a way forward. You always know what to do next. Gameplay loops. Gameplay loops are larger connections between various mechanics or groups of mechanics. So gameplay loops for D&D, for example, could be things like go into dungeon and then kill monsters level up, and then go into next dungeon. Right? And then you rinse and repeat. So a gameplay loop is really just a basic the basic reward cycle. Action to reward cycle of the game. Right? And the gameplay loops can be very big or very small. In a shooter, for instance, an FPS, the gameplay loop is as tiny as see target, move mouse to aim, shoot, look for next target. Right? And this loop repeats depending on the pace of the game and the skill of the player, can repeat several times per second. Right? Maybe not that fast, but like you can have the loop repeat once per second or something, right? And it can go on for a while like that. And that is a small gameplay loop, but that is an action reward cycle. Action reward. And or you can have very big gameplay loops. A game like Civilization has a gameplay has like gameplay loops nested within gameplay loops. You have the gameplay loop of the turn, where you start the turn, right? And then you get a bunch of resources for that turn. You allocate the resources, and then you end the turn. Right? That's the small gameplay loop. That's the main driver. But the big gameplay loops are start a project, right? Wait a couple of turns, and then the project pays off. So it could be training a unit, it could be building a wonder, it could be researching a technology, it could be conquering a city, right? Anything like that. Those are the larger gameplay loops. And the reason Civilization is so addictive and you get the whole one more turn thing is because you always have like a dozen or more of these larger loops constantly running in the background, and they all ping and reward you at different times. Right? So in one turn, you research a new technology. Awesome. And then you get rewarded and get that dopamine hit of, yes, I got a new technology. And then you start that loop again of selecting a next technology to research. And then that's you allocating your resources for the turn. You end your turn, a small gameplay loop. And next turn starts, boom, you trained a new unit. Awesome, right? Now I can go fight. And then you go to the city and say, all right, now I want to train this unit. Allocate your resources for the turn, end the turn. And then next turn you go, boom, I finished the wonder. Awesome, right? So every turn, not necessarily every turn, but that's kind of how the game is built, right? Every turn, every few turns, a new gameplay loop reaches its end, or not end, but like reaches the reward stage. You get the dopamine hit, and then you start the new loop knowing that in 20 turns you will get another dopamine hit from that loop. And while you're waiting for that loop to come around, a whole bunch of other loops are happening and giving you that dopamine hit. So you can definitely have nested and out of sync gameplay loops like that all happening simultaneously, right? Depending on the size and scope of your game. Um, so that's the combat turn could in a role playing game could also be a gameplay loop, right? It's your turn, start your turn, do your action, see the result, end turn. That could also be a gameplay loop, depending on how it's set up. Right? All right, player options. What do I mean with player options? Um, so player options is things like character classes, things like spells and abilities, things like um, different weapons, right? But also things like um, actions during combat. So essentially, you are telling the player, here are the things you can do, or here are the things I, the designer, give you as a base. What do you call that? The basic list of options, right? If I have a certain weapon list and all the weapons have different uh, traits and stats, then you as a player can pick the one you like the best. Potentially, if it's designed like that. If it's not designed in a way where some weapons are obviously superior to others, just mathematically, um, which does happen more frequently um, than is probably good for the game. Maybe D&D, for instance, there are definitely some weapons that are just objectively superior to other options, or some weapons that are subjectively inferior to other options within the design paradigm. Um, of course, again, this being a role playing game, that doesn't preclude that the dungeon master or players or so can suggest more options. And sometimes the game explicitly says you can also try other things like actions during combat, right? It gives you a specific list of saying you can attack, you can, I don't know, dash, you can try some maneuver, you can cast a spell, you can use an item, um, or you can try something else, and then the GM will be there to adjudicate if this is doable in this situation and how to check for it, right? But the basic actions that you give the player are kind of saying, all right, this is mainly what I, the designer, think the game is going to be about. And the kinds of choices I would like you to make, the kinds of things I want you to pay attention to, right? Um, so this is how do I phrase that? Uh, the default choices a player should pay attention to. Attention to. Okay. Mandatory processes. What is this? As the name implies, it's things that players have to do. It could be a very simple thing, or it could like a single check, or it could be something that they have no choice over. A mandatory process would be death and dying in Dungeons and Dragons, for example. Right. If your hit points hit 0, uh, that's it. You must now engage with the dying mechanic. You don't have a choice. Or it could be something as simple as whenever combat starts, whenever the players or the GM initiates the combat system, you roll for initiative. That is a mandatory step. You have to do that. So everyone is forced to pay attention to it. Right? It will 100% have an impact on the game. Right? So this is things like death and dying, um, initiative rolls. Oops. Uh, or any of the options where you must choose one, for example, could potentially fall into this as well, right? Where you have to engage with the system, like character creation, where you must engage with whatever things the character creation tells you your character needs. If your character needs to have an ancestry and a class, then you must engage with those things. If you don't engage with those things, you don't get to play the game. Right? So, uh, things a player must engage with, right? Either all the time, like character creation, you must engage with this, otherwise you don't get to play the game, or whenever the situation appears, like death and dying. The ad is going to start soon. I will talk about negative design space afterwards because that is a little bit more complex. Um, so that warrants a bit more time without the impending interruption of an ad. And of course, there are more
Endure.
possibilities.
In enduring, grow strong.
It's a lot to think about. Yeah. I mean, that's game design, right? The thing is, though, this is very importantly, this is for when you want to create a complete game, right? Um, this is for when you have a clear idea of what you want the game to accomplish, a clear goal, a clear vision, and then you are designing the complete game like that. You don't have to use all of these things. And I will probably repeat this point several times this stream. You don't have to use all of these things. You don't have to know all of them. And there are way too many examples out there for me to list all of them, for me to even know all of them, because any new RPG, the designer could have a stroke of genius and include some amazingly awesome mechanic that would fall into one of these categories or would be a completely new category onto itself, right? That will do what we want it to do. Um, and not every game does all of this, all of these together, right? If you wish to just get into game design and practice, you don't need to know all of this to start. You just have to pick a small thing, right? Write an RPG that's half a page or one page. That's it, right? You don't have to worry about all of this because you're not completing or you're not designing a complete game. Um, it's like it's just game design in general. Any game design. Um, it's don't start out with your magnum opus. Don't start out with the dream game. Don't start out even with a large game that'll take you 6 months. No. Start with a game that'll take you 2 weeks to make. Or maybe 1 month. Like, what can I make in 1 month? In a video game, maybe you can make a platformer where you have where a dude jumps over a gap, and that's it. That's the entire game. There's a gap in the level, you jump over it, ta-da, and that's it. Done. And this is your game. This is your finished product. Same with RPG. So you don't have to think about all of these, right? I'm always trying to make what I want to make far before I'm ready to do so. Yeah, that's a very natural drive, definitely, because when we create something, it's typically we create something because we want this thing to exist in the world, right? Or some artists or designers and creatives might say we need this thing to exist in the world, right? But it's the same with me. I design games that I want to play, right? Um, so or writers write stories that they want to tell, that they want to hear. Basically, they want the story to exist in the world, and so on. Um, but designing is a skill, is a craft. So just start out with simple things. That's kind of what I'm doing here with these streams. The games I design here are by no means complete games. I have designed games more complex than this, but I do that off stream, right? Uh, the things I design here are just very basic. What kind of a game do I want? What kind of things can I think about? What kind of tools are there that I can use? And that's what all of these things. That's what they are. These are tools. All of these mechanics are just tools in your toolbox that you can use um to have your game do something that you want, do the thing you wanted to do, right? Create the kind of gameplay experience you wanted to create. Um and you don't need all of these things. Right? Bigger games have more of them, smaller games have less of them. Um for instance, D&D only has a single structure. It only has a combat system, right? And then it only has this one simple gameplay loop. Um, it has it technically has a meta currency as written, but right, that's in the mechanics. That's actually a good case study of the dynamics of the game, right? So because the meta currency of D&D is kind of it's a good idea, and there are several other games that do something similar, right? Reward the player for playing their character, for quote unquote role playing, right? A lot of different games do this. Um, Fate does this. Savage Worlds does this. Any other that come to mind right now? Not really, but they give you a meta currency that you get from playing your character, and then you can use this meta currency to make your character mechanically more effective. The problem with this meta currency in D&D is the way this mechanic is attached to the rest of the game, right? It's you can only get one of these, and you can only get a single point of inspiration, and it only applies to something that's not all that central because it's overshadowed by so many other factors. Like When you spend inspiration on a roll, you can roll with advantage. But rolling with advantage, the impact that has is so tiny compared to just hoarding bonuses, just stacking bonuses, right? Because advantage, best case, will give you a +5 bonus statistically, right? And that's only if the difficulty class is right in the center, 10, 11. Then advantage will give you a +5 bonus effectively over a large number of rolls, right? Just probability wise. More likely, advantage is going to give you something like a +2 bonus, 2.5. And you go, I'll just stack bonuses normally and just have those there because they are much more tangible, they are much more direct. And then people just forget about inspiration and forget about using advantage like that because the mechanic itself is so weak. And that's a dynamic that emerges from the way it was designed. Advantage feels good. Yes, it does. It feels good. And on any single roll, it can make a big difference. But there are also other sources of advantage. You can literally maneuver yourself, narratively position yourself to gain advantage without spending inspiration. You can say, I don't know, I climb up on a boulder, attack this orc from above. Oh, you're in a better position. That should give you advantage. And you did that just by saying something, right? You didn't have to spend a precious resource to do so. You got the advantage for free, so to speak. And that's so inspiration doubles up on a mechanic that you can get for free and a mechanic that isn't all too impactful and all too tied into the rest of the game. Like if you look at how other games handle these types of meta currencies, in Fate, for example, you have something called aspects. And they're literally character aspects and scene aspects, so you can have a character who is I don't know, hard-boiled detective, right? Or hard-boiled investigator. And if you are searching for clues, for example, and making a check, you can say, oh, but I'm a hard-boiled investigator. I should be good at this. So you can spend a fate point to activate this aspect and get a bonus on your roll. And you want bonuses on your roll. They are not too easy to come by. In fact, the only way to get bonuses on your roll is to activate aspects. That's the only way you can do that. So you're constantly looking at how can I get more bonuses? What aspects are there that I can activate and use for my advantage? Right? So maybe you have hard-boiled detective or hard-boiled investigator, but you also have the aspect an eye for detail or something. Oh, well, if I'm searching for clues, I will use that aspect as well and get another bonus. Right? So you spend 2 fate points, one for each aspect, and then you get a huge bonus on your roll. And these bonuses are very significant because of the numbers involved in the game. And so fate points are constantly on your mind because the only way to get bonuses is to spend fate points, and you really, really want those bonuses. So you're always looking to spend fate points. Right? Similar to Savage Worlds with bennies, right? Benefits, which is the meta currency there. You can do things that you cannot otherwise do. If you get hit by an attack, you can spend a benny to try and reduce the damage. That is the only way in the entire game how you can reduce damage of an incoming attack. If you are shaken in combat, right? If you got hit and you're shaken, you can spend a penny to become unshaken. That is the only way to become unshaken without rolling the dice in the entire game, right? And so on and so forth. There are multiple smaller things you can do with bennies that are very, very impactful, and it's the only way you can get that result. You must spend a penny to do that. And so the penny has a very clear niche, a very clear area of effect that no other mechanic can touch. Same with the fate points and fate. And so no other mechanic conflicts with that. And so your mind is always on, oh, I should spend this meta currency. Our DM rewards smart choices, thinking creatively, doing great story point connect to character, not always advantage, but also lowering DC or adding to the So and that is definitely doable. It's not rules as written though. It's not rules as written. And that's something important to keep in mind when designing games, especially role-playing games. You have to ignore homebrewing. You have to ignore house ruling. You have to imagine that those things don't exist to a certain degree. Right? Takes a lot of inspiration from other games. Yeah, and that's great because there are a lot of good games out there. But if you are designing a game, and essentially saying, oh, my game is kind of broken, my game kind of doesn't really work, but you know what? Each table can just homebrew their own stuff to fix it. You're not designing a game, you're designing a broken mess. Right? You cannot, as a designer, or I say cannot as if this was a hard rule or a law. No, you really, really should not. If you want to create a good game, you really should not rely on player groups or dungeon masters or so to fix your game with house rules. Don't do that. Rules as written should also be what you intend. If people then say, oh, I like this game, but I don't like this one certain part because every table is different, every person is different, the exact fun we're looking for is always individual. Okay, but again, that is like speedrunning. Speedrunning video games, no designer could have really accounted for speedrunners existing. You cannot anticipate that. You cannot account for that. So you shouldn't design toward that. Don't design toward everything being possible, everyone being pleased. Right? That shouldn't be the goal. You should have a vision, a goal of what kind of a gameplay experience you want. Do your best to design mechanics that will lead to that gameplay experience. And if other people playing the game then try to change your game, well, okay, that's on them. That is no longer your responsibility. As long as they are not changing the game because your game isn't actually delivering on its promises, right? That's a different story. Then you failed. But right, if your game does deliver what it says it should deliver, and then people say, I don't want that. It's like I'm ordering a pepperoni pizza, but I also want onions on there. Okay. There are lots of people who love pepperoni pizza. Awesome. And maybe this one person also wants onions on their pepperoni pizza. Okay, but you cannot account for that. So you shouldn't design for that, so to speak. Right? Design a pizza for that. If the player wants to add onions to their pepperoni pizza, sure, let them. But don't worry about it. Right? There are plenty of other people who just enjoy pepperoni pizza. And that means you designed a good pizza. Right? So that's the thing with house rules and home brewing and such. Um, Negative design space. So negative design space is a bit more difficult to talk about. So in terms of mechanics and role playing games, negative design space is essentially designing for like to create things that aren't there. Kind of, it's very difficult to summarize. So, two examples. In OSR, and I've talked about this in other streams as well. In older, old school D&D, right? The original from the 70s and such, and games that try to emulate that kind of play style. In that kind of D&D, combat was extremely deadly, right? Your level 1 character, even your level 2 or level 3 character, depending on how well you rolled your hit points and such, could die from a single good attack. Completely possible, right? Um, you could have something like 4 or 5 hit points at the start of the game, and an attack might deal 6, 7, 8 damage to you. And if that attack hits, that's it. Your character's dead. Boom, gone. Create a new one. Right? So in just one attack, your character could die, or just one poison needle, your character dies. Right? So combat was designed to be extremely deadly, and once you're in combat and you're just playing by the mechanics of I attack, oh, monster attacks, I attack, monster attacks, your character is most likely going to die. So that means that there are also traps that just kill you. Yes, save or die. Right. Save or die was very, very common in older D&D and in older play styles. So what that means with having a combat system this deadly is that players would actively avoid combat. So you make a combat system specifically so that players do not engage with it. Lost a group of characters who bone wall. Oof. Oh my goodness. That sounds rough. But sounds good for the wall. More bones, you know. Mm. Yeah, indeed. um so you are designing something in the game with the express intention that nobody will use it in the game. But because the usage of this thing, of this structure, of this mechanic, is tied to a specific action in the game, combat, that also means that the players will avoid that action so that they don't have to engage with the mechanic that's associated with it. Right? So one example would be highly lethal combat in old school D&D. That's one example. Another game that I sadly lost track of, but I like the designer was posting about it on Twitter and such, is a horror game where you are trapped on a submarine with a monster that's stalking you. So very alien. Right? I remember people talking about Silent Hill's combat being so clunky and hard because you shouldn't be fighting when you see an enemy. Yeah, same idea. Same idea. Right? If enemies can deal large damage to you, or if your attacks are very ineffective, or the controls are wonky, and so on, yeah, that means you shouldn't be engaging with the mechanic. when you see a monster, you should run away, or you should avoid it, or so. Yeah, same idea, exactly. Um, but yeah, so this role playing game was you are a crew on a submarine that is like lost control and can no longer surface and so on, and you are trapped in there with a monster that is stalking you. And you cannot hope to fight this monster. If you meet the monster, it will kill you, right? So you must, I don't know, try to repair the submarine or something before you all get caught and killed by the monster. So like Alien, like the first Alien movie. Um and so one of the biggest things in that game is hiding from the monster, right? You must, when you hear the monster approaching, you need to hide because if it finds you, you're dead. However, there was not a single hiding mechanic in the entire game. Intentionally. There was no stealth check or hide check or any sort of skill or anything associated with hiding from the monster. You had to use your environment and use the narration to effectively hide from the monster. And that is a different example of negative design space, of negative design, where you intentionally don't include mechanics for a core aspect of your gameplay because the mechanics would um would change the way this core aspect feels, right? It's kind of stat check. It's the idea of stat checking. Um, so stat checking is whenever you encounter an obstacle, you just throw a character stat at the obstacle, and then see if you overcome it. Right? A lot of video games do this. If you encounter a lock, you throw your character's lock picking skill at it, and then maybe you overcome it. If you encounter a trap, you throw your character's disable trap at it. If you encounter a guard, you throw your character's persuade stat at it. If you need to sneak, you throw your character's stealth stat at the sneaking mini game or whatever. Right? That's stat checking, and the game very very intentionally avoids stat checking because it wants players to immerse themselves into the situation, into the narrative, and go, holy crap, I'm in this cabin. There's only one door out, and the monster's in the hallway coming here, coming this way. What do I do? Right? And if you were able to just stat check your way out of there, that would remove all of the tension. You just say, oh, I have a pretty good stealth skill. Let me just roll some dice. Done. But no, you have to go, oh crap. Can I hide under the bed? Is there a bed in this room? Is there a locker? Is it big enough for me? Can I get in there quickly enough without making too much noise? And then you actually have to think about these things. And that creates a specific type of tension that this game is trying to emulate. Right? Um, so things like lack of stealth mechanics in survival horror or so, right? And essentially, this is two different things. This one is use mechanics to make players avoid the associated action. And this one is Um, avoid mechanics, and you don't have to go to this extreme. You don't have to say there are absolutely no mechanics, right? This is just one example. Avoid mechanics to create immersion. And yeah, yeah, that's it. So, which is a bit counterintuitive, right? Negative design space is a bit counterintuitive. You don't have to use it. It is more difficult, right? Usually we talk about, oh, mechanics can create immersion because they show us what the game is about. They show us what's important in the game. They allow us to look at our character and really get into it. But a lack of mechanics can also create immersion when used well, right? So that's a bit more complex. Negative design space is a bit more complex than the others. And it's also something not often talked about in this sense. The others are more like reward mechanics, especially, are very, very obvious. Um, to use. Um, okay. So several categories of mechanics that directly that can help shape the play. Um, and what you need to watch out for as a designer is that your mechanics don't encourage or drive one type of play while your design goal was actually a different type of play, right? It's not This is not saying that one type of play or one type of fun or so is better than another. That's not what this is saying. And you shouldn't judge like the type of fun that people have playing games. Don't do that, right? But if you are trying to design a game that where you wanted to create a certain type of fun, but then the mechanics you design drive a different type of fun, something went wrong, right? Your design goals are not matching with your actual design result. And the only way you can fix that is by looking at the mechanics. So, one part. Hold on, can I do this? Can I make this 100%? There we go. It's a bit better. Um, where this can go wrong is like in some of these, it's easier for them to go wrong than for others, right? So when design goal and design result don't match, right? That means mechanics encourage or lead to. Hey, I'm on Ishtar. Good morning. How are you doing? It's nice to have you here. Uh, we're doing some theory for role playing game design. Um, okay, let me finish writing this first. Produces kind of fun, which is different from the envisioned one. Okay, so that was a very long sentence. The mechanics encourage or lead to a certain engagement with the game, right? That produces a specific kind of fun, which is different from the envisioned one. So you envisioned a certain type of fun, but then the mechanics actually lead players to play the game in a certain way, which produces a different type of fun. And one example, I don't know if this is really an example, um, but we can analyze Dungeons and Dragons for this. So, especially the change in Dungeons and Dragons. So, reward mechanics are often a very obvious tool to guide player engagement and to guide the way players will actually play the game. So I'm just going to call this old D&D because there's lots of older versions of it, and then somewhere around second edition it switched, right? So old D&D, characters get XP for gold. And then you get how do I call this? Modern D&D? Characters get XP for killing monsters. And then maybe like new D&D, right? Which really only started with 5th edition. You have milestone XP. And each of these leads to completely different ways to engage with the game because XP is. Oh, sorry, I just bumped the mic. XP is the biggest, the biggest reward mechanic and one of the biggest drivers of the game as a whole. One of the engines that's constantly running, right? A big thing in playing D&D and similar role-playing games is to get XP and to see your character become more powerful, and then to engage in tougher challenges, get even more XP, become even more powerful. Right? That is a gameplay loop, and that is a powerful driver for shaping the game in general. Right? The XP mechanic. But simply by changing what players or the characters rather get XP for, what kinds of actions they get XP for, changes the way the players will engage with the game. So characters get XP for gold will lead to valuing treasure and avoiding dangers. Right? So, like I said, killing can also end up that a table viewpoint develops that could harm your story if you wish to tell. Yes. I'm getting to that. So if you get XP for gold, and this is like depending on the exact version of the game or the exact way you interpret the rules and such, it could be gold pieces you find or gold pieces you actually loot and get out of the dungeon back to civilization. Some of the OSR games also make gold that you spend. right? But in general, it's if you find treasure, it doesn't have to be gold pieces specifically. It's just treasure. Yeah, floating disc is from this good XP times. Exactly. Tensor's floating disc is you get a spell that is a disc where you can just load all of your treasure on there. Because the point is just to get out with as much treasure as possible. So you value treasure and you avoid dangers. You don't go into fights. You might sneak a lot more. You might talk to monsters in the dungeon, right? You might just walk away and such. You might say, oh, there's a treasure chest, but there's also a horde of orcs guarding it. Not worth it, right? Let's go away and go somewhere else. Um, and it leads to combined with the dangerous combat and such combines leads to things like treating the game as a puzzle, really looking everywhere to find treasure, and because of the tight inventory management rules, risk reward evaluation, exactly. All of these are really risk reward evaluation, but the reward or the risk is always different, right? And because of the inventory management mechanics that these games tend to have, you also go, oh, do I drop my rations to carry this extra bit of treasure? Right? Because that will make me stronger, right? Short term versus long term gain and such. So you get a lot of these things happening. In Characters Get XP for Killing Monsters, you basically get the idea of kill everything. And this is what gave rise to the murder hobo, or murder hobo types of players probably existed before that, definitely, right? But this is what enabled them. This is what enables the murder hobo gameplay because the game rewards you for doing that. If you slaughter an entire village, you get 500 XP. Is it a lot of XP? Maybe not. But hey, it's free XP. Basically, right? If I kill this town guard, I get 200 XP. Okay then, let's do it. But the travel took us 3 days. You might need a ration. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So that's the kinds of decisions and the kinds of choices you make during a game like that. And of course, the kill everything is not just like slaughtering villagers and such, even though, if that gives you XP, if villagers have stat blocks with an XP value listed on there, then yes, you can expect players to try and kill that villager to get that XP. But more so, it's also whenever you're in a dungeon and you see a monster, the first instinct is not to run away or hide or plan. The first instinct is, I want to kill that. Could also end with big XP cap because no fights are possible. Do you mean once you are too high level? That's another thing. Like, but that's fights and curse through rewards. Yeah, exactly. That's a related issue with characters gaining power and how do the challenges keep up? Right? How do the challenges become more difficult? Wrong system for his story moment. Yes, exactly. So the kill everything, right? Important quest NPCs or story related NPCs or monsters or whatever. If the GM thinks, oh, there's this monster, but this monster has important information and I want the players to talk to this monster. But you're playing a game that actively encourages players to kill everything that they see because they get rewarded for it. Then, yeah, right. You get a clash of these two intentions. Day without a fight also could feel bad because no XP are given out. Yeah, depends on the group, definitely. But yes, fights are definitely encouraged. So the idea of the dungeon is no longer you sneak in and try to grab what you can and then run. The idea of a dungeon becomes clearing the dungeon, murdering everything. Right? So it leads to a completely different play style, a completely different play attitude, and completely different kinds of fun. Prone to violent solution. Yep. And then with 5th edition, they formally said, okay, milestone XP is a thing. This already existed kind of in 3rd edition, and I think 4th edition, I'm not 100% sure. But it was explicitly stated and even like given guidelines for in 5th edition. And I think by now it is the default way most people play, by giving out milestone XP. Like every group I ask, they all play with milestone XP. And milestone XP is about narrative achievements. Solution XP. So you just solve a problem, and it doesn't matter how you solve it. As long as you solve it, you get XP. That was also kind of how it was indicated in 3rd edition, right? They kind of tried to weasel their way out of it by saying, "Oh yeah, we attach an XP value to a monster, but you have to beat the monster to get the XP. But beating it does not mean killing it. If you sneak past the monster, you also beat it, and that means you get the XP." But that is so nebulous, and maybe the party could be like, "Oh, we sneak past the monster, we get the XP. Okay, now we turn around and kill it." It's like, huh? Right. So, and it also doesn't help that a lot of treasure was tied to monsters, right? Because a monster would have a treasure table attached to it. They would say, if you kill this monster, you will get this treasure. So you get doubly rewarded. When you manage to finish a problem like a conversation, fight, or create a benefit for you, give you XP at the end. Yeah. Yeah. That is also a way I've often seen it done. But again, that is, for a lot of games, that is homebrewing. That is not how the game was written. So I already said, when we design a game, we cannot take into account homebrewing. And when we evaluate the design of a game, we also have to ignore homebrewing. This is a small side note. When you are looking at what is this game doing, is this game fun for me? Is this game good? How is the design of this game? Don't fall into the rule zero fallacy. Right. No, this was more built because I had RP heavy player, couldn't let us out of the reward loop. Yeah. Exactly. You have to invent a new system, basically, to make the game do something it wasn't designed to do. And that exactly is the rule zero fallacy. So rule zero is essentially saying you can change any rule in a game, right? If any rule doesn't fit your table, or you don't like it, or whatever reason, you can change it. But don't say that every game, it doesn't matter what system I play because I can just change it, or I can't say if a system is good or bad, or if a design is good or bad because I can just change it. That is fallacious. That is not correct, because you can always judge how a system was designed. Changing a system, especially if you feel like you need to change a system because the system is broken or incomplete, is literally admitting that the system is broken or incomplete. Right? So, no, the system isn't broken because I can just change it, is saying, no, the system is broken because you have to change it. It's like, no, this car isn't broken because I can just put on my own wheels and tires. No, you bought a car without wheels and tires. That car was incomplete. Right? Um, so that's kind of the same idea. I have a DM in the Dark Eye, uses like time spent as XP evaluation system because of the point buy system. Ah, yeah, and that's also a way to do it. Right? The car isn't broken, I fixed the engine. Exactly. Yeah, the car isn't broken because I fixed it. Well, but you had to fix it. That means the car was broken to begin with. Same with games. If you have to homebrew something because a rule doesn't work or is incomplete or is broken or something, that literally means the game is broken. And that is a rule zero fallacy. So when evaluating a design, or when, very importantly, when designing, don't fall into that. Right? I said this before on the stream, and I've probably said it in many other streams as well. When you are designing a game and you are relying on the players to fix the game, your game is broken and you are doing bad design. Skyrim is great. I have 50 mods. Yes. Yes. Exactly. It's like, oh, I cannot play Skyrim without 50 mods. Now, that just means Skyrim is a crap game. If you need so many other people to spend their free time fixing the game for you, that means Skyrim is a broken game. By the way, Skyrim is actually a broken game. um, so yeah, don't fall into that trap as a designer, and also don't fall into that trap when trying to evaluate a game. At the end of the day, if a game is like 95% or 90% what you want to play, but there's just this one little bit where you think, if I change this, it will be an even better fit for me or for my table. Awesome. Sure, that's great. But don't think, oh, I have to change 50 things in this game in order to make it function. You can spend your time just learning a better game, playing a better game, right? Just don't don't waste your time like that and your energy. It's not worth it. It's really not worth it. If you have to spend a month learning D&D and then spend another 3 months um house ruling it, just learn another game. Another game might take you a week to learn. There are many games that are simpler. Make your own rulebook at this point. Yeah. To be fair, that's what I do. uh that's why I design games, because I want to play certain games. But I mean, I enjoy designing games, right? And I get to do stuff like this. I get to talk about game design. I really enjoy it. So for me, it's not wasting time. Like, if you enjoy designing games, if you enjoy homebrewing games and such, okay, go ahead, knock yourself out. That's awesome, right? It is a kind of fun. But don't say a game is good because you can homebrew it. 50 adjustments, you might have it already. Yeah, that's the thing. In fact, a lot of early designs, early RPG designs, are called heartbreakers, specifically because of this. Heartbreaker is a type of design, a type of game where you take a game that you have learned, usually some form of Dungeons and Dragons, and then you change the design to make it fit you. And that design eventually has changed so much it becomes its own game. And this game is called a Heartbreaker because you were learning a specific game, you like the specific game, but then you had your heart broken by it because it's not quite a good fit, and then you try to fix it. And the fix becomes its own game. Right? That's Heartbreaker design or Heartbreaker game. It's an actual thing. That has, and back when role playing games, like 20 years ago, when role playing games weren't as prolific, um, and we didn't have that many games to look to and that much design experience, collective design experience to fall back on. Um, Heartbreaker designs were very, very common, right? Because most designers back then were just homebrewers. We didn't know better. We're just homebrewers who got together on internet forums and discussed various ways of homebrewing the game and making certain design choices. And slowly over time, the idea of design goals and game design and role-playing game theory and such started to emerge. I think point by milestone leveling like D&D is a big decision for a TTRPG system. Yeah, um, definitely. They can, and that's another thing, right? Some mechanic or many mechanics can have fundamental changes in how the game is engaged with. Like we see here, if you switch to milestone XP, suddenly players are discouraged from killing everything, right? Because they don't necessarily gain XP for it directly. There are other things in D&D that still encourage a kill everything mentality, namely the very intricate combat system where you really get to use all of your character abilities and engage with the mechanics in a structured way, where you can feel powerful, where you can feel impactful, right? So that encourages players to rush into combat, among some other things. But milestone XP in and of itself doesn't do that anymore. As long as you get to the next narrative achievement, to the next chapter, next story beat, whatever, you will get XP. Maybe even the end of the session, right? You will then get XP. Um, and yeah, and that changes the way the game is played. So this is one example, one big example of how something that seems very simple can really change the way a game is played. Right. Solution XP system is more an adjusted milestone system, smaller increments. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So instead of a big chapter, you get like small, all the steps that lead to the end of the chapter, so to speak. Um, Now this is a very obvious, a very obvious implementation of this, right? Reward mechanics in general, like we had oops, over here, right? Reward mechanics are a uh, almost like a blunt force instrument, like a sledgehammer to guiding player play style. And that's why they are used in many, many, many games, right? Most games have some form of character advancement because it is such a simple way of driving player engagement and to drive play styles, right? Um, Other systems are not as obvious and are not as direct. So I think that sometimes item loot can be a flawed reward system. Um, yeah, like any reward system, uh, it can be implemented well or it can be implemented badly. Um, it depends on what you want. For example, the game Numenera. You get a certain type of loot, which is called ciphers, which are one-time use special items that give you that allow you to do something amazing and cool once. And the idea is characters can only carry like two or three of them at once, but the GM is encouraged to constantly throw these ciphers at players. Right. And the idea is then that players are encouraged through this system to constantly use their ciphers and to constantly do cool stuff, and constantly get new abilities that they then use and then lose, and then they get a different new cool ability. As the only bard from my DM, I got a harp. Oof, harp! Like one of those big things. That's um, that's difficult. But that's also like not no guidance from the system, I guess, of how to handle loot and what loot it's supposed to do. The big one at the end of a dungeon with small staircases. Oof, yeah, okay, that's rough. Like how do you deal with that? Um yeah, that's um I would say that's not necessarily a random loot table for the win. Yeah, okay,
Endure.
fair.
In enduring, grow strong.
Oof. Hey, Bridget. Hi. Nice to see you. How are you doing? We're currently in an ad break, so I'm just stretching a little bit, but nice to see you here. How goes? We are talking about some RPG design theory or game design theory in general, I guess. But you can always apply that to RPG design. How are you? I'm doing fine. Thank you for asking. It's relatively cool here right now, so it's nice, you know. Um, and it's rainy, so I don't feel like I'm missing anything by not going out. It's good. It's good. I have some chips. I have some water. A reason why I often build my loot tables with the items I found usable for my table. Yeah, and I guess that's how you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to um, look at the group and design loot for them that way. Though, mm, not always. Not always. Nothing is more frustrating when you get an item you could use, but is practically useless for your aim path. That okay, hold on. Yes, I agree with you. It is very frustrating if, say, you are playing, like, for example, a barbarian with a big two-handed axe, and then the GM gives you a short sword saying, "Yeah, this is for you, barbarian." It's like, what are you doing, right? Um, Yes, I agree. That is a thing. Um, but um that not implies, that requires you to be playing a game that has character pass. Oh, can't hear you. Oh no. Uh uh okay. Um so if you are playing a game that has character paths and character builds, I think it was likely because of that, possibly because of the ads. Like the ads are over now, so hopefully it will be better. Uh Doing good. Thank you for asking. Okay, that's good to hear. But yeah, hopefully it will get better now without the ads. We will have another hour of ad free time. So yeah. Um, where was I? Yeah. So if you are playing a game that has character builds, character paths, and so on, then yes, the loot you find should complement whatever build you had in mind for your character. Yeah, you have to text me. Oh, so yeah, I'm sorry. Uh, will get better. Okay. Um. Okay. Right. That is not always the case. All right. That is not always the case. So in more modern games, also tied in with the whole we are telling an epic story. We are everyone is having our character with a lot of personality, with our own story arcs and such, with and depending on the system with character builds, right? Like D&D is you can really build your character. In some other systems, the Dark Eye or Shadowrun or so, you can also really build your character, plan them out from level 1 to level 20, right? um that that kind of game style encourages that you stick to a certain path. But again, to take the old school D&D as an example, that's not always necessary. In old school D&D, your character is a nobody. Your character is likely going to die, if not this session, then 2 or 3 sessions in. Your character will do whatever they can to survive. You take what you can get. And random loot tables are really good for that. Right? So it's not, oh, I wish to play a big barbarian with a two-handed axe, and I've planned out all the feats and abilities and skills and such that I will take from level 1 to level 20. You go, no, 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 no. I have a character here who happens to be pretty strong. Let's see where this goes. And then you go into a dungeon, and then the GM just randomly rolls up a two-handed axe, and you go, awesome! My character is strong, a two-handed axe fits this character. I will take it. Right? And you get this emergent story from that, but you don't really have a character plan for it. Right? So it's Meat Grinder also changed the emotional connection to your creation. Yes, definitely. Definitely. Um so random loot tables are not in and of themselves flawed. but their implementation can be if they do not fit what the rest of the game is doing. You have fun, have a great day or night, take care of yourself, everyone, goodbye. Uh uh okay. Right. So in an old school RPG, random loot tables are great. In a more modern, narrative focused, story arc focused, um, uh, RPG, random loot tables might be very disruptive. Um, and then you get your Diablo 2 clones, your loot based life service games, where yes, you want a certain character build, but you have random loot tables, and that means grinding, right? Um, right. So again, there are like most mechanics can always work. Like the mechanics in and of themselves are not necessarily broken, but they might not fit together well, or you might already have a certain framework, and then that mechanic goes against what the rest of the game is trying to do. Right? So that is a really, really good example, right? Random loot tables. Um, in a game where you are trying to build your character instead of exploring your character, right? Um, or discovering your character is probably a better way to put it. Um, all right. What else? So yeah, it's mostly that implementation is flawed. That's a good point to put down. I do sometimes like a random item that makes me rethink my build path. And yeah, sure. Um, and as a player, you might welcome this flexibility, or you might welcome this inspiration, right? This prompt, really. If you're looking at, oh, I want to play this kind of character, and then you get a really cool item, and you say, oh, this is awesome. I want to implement this. Sure, that is a moment of inspiration, and that can be a lot of fun. Um, and that is also something that can happen, though, and that is, I guess, not being able to take everything into account as a designer. Right? This is what I was talking about in the beginning. How do players engage with the game? Yeah. Good night, Brigitte or Bridget. Okay. My lack of sleep is catching up with me slightly. Um, how do players engage with the game? How do they approach the mechanics? How do they accept the mechanics? And what kind of fun will that produce? Right. So yes, um, every now and then a random item can just make you rethink and say, "Oh, this random table has a better idea, or gave me a better idea than I could think of." And that's why random tables exist a lot of the times, right? Because they can create some really good ideas that we couldn't have thought of ourselves, really. Um, So you can't anticipate that, but you can help design towards something like that. Right? If you disincentivize um planning out your character completely, that will make players in general more accepting of random items or so, right? If you change the way player growth or character growth works, like in Blades in the Dark, you can have a lot of lateral growth that is um, activated by the player. Right? The player says, "I wish to train this. I wish to research a spell. I wish to make a contact." Um, then that has a lot more ability. That system has a lot more ability to respond to and adapt to random events, or not random events, but like events that emerge during gameplay that you cannot plan for. Right. So that's what I'm trying to say here is you could bet on some players being more. I don't know if open-minded is the right word, but on players being more accepting to clashes in intention, or being like going with the flow and such. Or you could try and design a game that ensures that the people who do play this game will be the types of players who then enjoy things like random loot. Right? If everything in your game is you plan out your character, you have a fixed build path for your character, and then you throw in things like random loot and such, um, why are you doing that? Why are you intentionally sabotaging your game? Right? Sure, some players might be open to that, and that's cool. But everything in your design screams the players who would enjoy this game would enjoy planning and building. For Mirage, I made a list for my DM or item that would fit my rough idea for her when he needs inspiration for loot for her, but when it is random, I can also work with this. Yeah. And again, that is you as the player putting in work. I mean, awesome. Yes, you should always let your GM know what you would like from the game. That's part of communication. That makes sure that the game you're playing, the story you're experiencing, the challenges you're facing are actually things you want to see in game and want to experience. Um, I looked at items that could fit a changing method actor because the DM can't know all the items in the game. Yeah, exactly, exactly, and that is a really good attitude. Um, that is a really good thing to do as a player. That's a completely different discussion, though. I mean, yes, as a player, don't expect your DM or your game master to do all of the work. If you have certain things in mind, tell your GM, look through the books yourself, or give their GM ideas to work off of, right? Um, so, and again, what I'm trying to say here is, um, roughly 6 items for an inspiration. That's pretty good. That's quite a lot to go off of. Like as a game master myself, I would love if players gave me things like this so that I know what to prepare for them. Because then it makes sure that that's things that they actually want, right? Um, what was I thinking of? So when I was talking about the rule zero fallacy, right? The game isn't broken because I can fix it. Um, Closely related to that is the fallacy of saying A great GM can make any game good. Yes. Some with thematic notes with my thoughts to them. Okay, even more prompts. That's good. But yeah, a great GM. Friends make this game work. The social aspect is also very important to this, right? So, do I write this down? I don't know. A great GM can make any game good. That is true. It's not wrong to say a great GM can make any game good. But if your game relies on being run by a great GM to become a good game, then your game was bad to begin with. Right? It's kind of a corollary to the rule zero fallacy. Right? And um and you can have a similar thing to the players. A great player can make any system work for them. Or a great player can find fun in any system. Right? I love someone who loves multiplayer games but always explains stories that were social interactions. Yeah, definitely. And that's a lot of why we play multiplayer games. Right? We remember those things more than the game itself more often. Um, yeah, so from the player side of things, you can say a great player will find fun in any system. Again, that is often true. But if you are relying on a great player to find your system fun, then your system is probably not fun for everyone else, right? Same kind of idea. So if you have a system that is internally conflicting, that has clashes, that where systems don't mesh together, where it's not clear what kind of fun you are trying to aim for, or all of these things. Sure, a great player can take the system and say, I will still have fun. Right. I will still have fun with this. I'm playing with my friends, or I can make this work. It's okay, right? I'll find the fun in this. And but that is an admittance that your game is bad. But I found it funny because the mention of the game was secondary information. Ah, okay. So it's just, by the way, this happened in this game. Yeah. Um, I'm not trying to say here, by the way, that people who play games with friends mainly because they want to hang out with friends are doing games wrong. That's not what I'm saying. Again, the social aspect of playing games with other people is very, very important, and to many people that is their main source of fun, right? Hanging out with friends, having a good time with friends. Um, but if your game is not specifically designed for that and it's designed for something else, and then it still requires players to say, okay, I will disregard the game and just hang out with friends, then your game is still not doing what it's meant to do, right? Um, I hope that was kind of sort of clear. So, um, when the fun comes from one specific synergy, it might be highly relying on its existence. Kind of. It's not just that it it it's relying on this existence. It's that the player has to create this out of the game when it doesn't exist in the game. That's what I'm trying to say. So you can have some games that are really just I'm hanging out with my friends having fun. A lot of party games act like this, right? Party games, the rules are often very, very simple, very quick, and they rely on a lot of social interaction, right? The rules build social interaction with other players and just communication, right? And party games are like the main source of fun for a party game is I am hanging out with my friends having a silly good time. If you're not designing a party game and yet when players play your game, they have to create their fun as if this was a party game, then your game has failed for them or in general. Depends, right? So it's not so much that your game needs to have this part of the rules and then you only emphasize this part, or not rules, but this part of the fun. It's your game isn't focused on that. It might not really exist, but gamers have to, or players then have to create it anyway, dig it out anyway, and treat your game as if it was geared for this kind of fun, right? Social fun instead of some other type of fun. Um, that's what I'm trying to say. So, uh, I found funny that some party games are found known to create quarrels in friend groups. Yeah, some party games are a bit too confrontation, not confrontational, but adversarial. Yeah, definitely they can be like that. Or maybe some people are just sore losers. You know that also happens. Um, so party games, good party games are party games that you cannot win, really. Um, so let me write this down. Rule zero fallacy is uh, the game isn't broken because I can fix it. Right? That's essentially what it says. And then we have corollary. Is it corollary? Let me look up this word. Confrontational game and bad losers? Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, corollary. Okay. I got it right. So, corollary. So, the GM corollary is a great GM can make a bad game good. Again, this is so admits the game is broken, admits the game is bad. Oops. Because the corollary from this is a great GM can make a good game great. And wouldn't you rather play a great game than just a good game? Right? Definition of a bad game. Again, depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to make a light-hearted party game where people can have fun, then having a very confrontational game that really gets out a competitive side in people can be bad. Sometimes I think a bad game is a TTRPG that doesn't work with this table composition. Not necessarily. That game would be a bad fit. That game would be a bad fit, and that is certainly possible because every table is different. Right? People are different. They enjoy different things. Every table is different and wants to do different things. Um, Risk, yeah, Risk is a bad party game, definitely. Very, very bad party game. I was thinking more along the lines like charades or Cards Against Humanity or things like that, right? Which are which rely a lot on communication and lighthearted fun and being silly. Um, but yeah, there are games that are bad for certain groups because the game is trying to do one thing, but the group enjoys a different thing, and that is perfectly okay, right? A game shouldn't try to appeal to everyone. And because it doesn't appeal to everyone, there will be people who will not enjoy that type of game. That's just the reality of things. A good design will not be fun for everyone, but it will be a lot of fun for the people who enjoy that kind of fun. Right? If you enjoy puzzle games, a good puzzle game or great puzzle game will be a lot of fun for you. But someone who doesn't like puzzle games will never find a puzzle game fun, essentially. Well, maybe there might be exception, but you know what I mean, right? They will not touch puzzle games no matter how great of a puzzle game it is because it's a puzzle game, right? But a bad puzzle game won't be fun even for people who like puzzle games. And that is my definition of a bad game. A bad game is not fun for people who would enjoy this type of game, who would enjoy having this kind of fun. Right? So there are, and you can see that there are many games in big genres, some of which are absolutely celebrated, and some of which are just completely blasted and said, no, this is horrible. Role playing games, for example, Baldur's Gate 3 is a freakishly amazing role playing game. It won Game of the Year. It like everyone is celebrating it. Everyone who plays it says, "I cannot stop. I have 5,000 hours in this. Please send help." Right? Um, and and it's a really really good game. So I've heard. I haven't actually played it myself. So, but I will believe it when the entire internet cannot stop talking about Baldur's Gate 3. And then you get something like Starfield, which is also a role playing game. But Starfield isn't fun for people who enjoy role playing games because it's a bad game, right? So that's what I mean by bad game. A game that objectively has bad design or bad development, bad implementation, bad technical stuff, whatever, right? Really horrible themes or messaging. It can be so many things, right? Games are complex. But you can relatively objectively say this game has good design. Fallout 76, yeah. Exactly. Fallout 76. Um sure, some people there will always be people who find that fun. Right? There are certainly people who enjoyed launch Fallout 76. There are certainly people who are enjoying Starfield. No question about it. But that's because there are so many people who play these games and so many different types of fun that one can have. So there is always going to be someone who thinks that a certain bad game is going to be fun for them. But they are the exception that proves the rule. right? Overall, people who love role playing games will go to Baldur's Gate 3 and say, this is an amazing game. And they will look at Starfield and say, no, this is a bad game. So it's definitely possible to talk about it somewhat objectively. Of course, fun is always subjective, but you can always look at what was the design intention, what was the actual result that was created. Can we analyze the design to see where it went wrong? And if you look at Starfield as an example, a lot of people have just analyzed it and said, where did it go wrong? And there's a lot of places where it went wrong. And they can explain exactly how it went wrong and why it doesn't work. So yeah, that is what it means, what I talk about with a bad game. And the same thing exists for role-playing games. Right? You can have role-playing games that are bad. There are some role-playing games out there that are actually pretty horrendous. That I will not name. And then there are role-playing games out there that are really, really good, that everyone who has played them will say, this is freakishly amazing. Blades in the Dark right now. Apparently, Blades in the Dark is something like the second most popular indie role-playing game or role-playing game in general out there, which is freakishly crazy. But not surprising because it is really good, right? It is a really good game. It does a lot of things correctly. Um, so, right, so a GM corollary to this is a great GM can make a bad game good, but that admits that the game is already bad. And that completely overlooks the fact that if you're not playing a bad game, but a good game, a great GM can make a good game great. So why are you only playing a game that's been made good instead of a game that's been made great? Wish to play Dark Eye and Starfinder again, mix up from my usual D&D playing. Yeah, see, and they are different games that satisfy different itches, so to speak, right? Definitely. Like I love certain games just because of like the character building that I can do there. Shadowrun or the Dark Eye. It's like, oh, I look at those character building options and I look at it as a puzzle. It's like, oh, I enjoy these character building options. Will I actually enjoy playing the game? Maybe not. But there is a certain type of fun to be had in there. Okay. And then there is a player corollary to all this, which is a great player can find fun in a uh, in an unfun system. Now this one is much more subjective. It could be that the system is not a good match. It could also be that the system is just, you know, generally unfun. Dark Eye Matilda is a sparkly character full of joy and happiness. Also leads to burnout. Oh no. Sorry. No, I haven't been sleeping well these last few days. I was woken up this morning at like 7:30 and wasn't really able to go back to sleep after that. That was not enough sleep. So that's catching up with me a little bit. Um Logic on the table can lead to player and game master burnout. Yes. Yes. If a GM has to spend a lot of time and effort trying to fix the game, If a player has to constantly fight against the mechanics or against the game to try and find fun, that can lead to a lot of burnout, right? So this is GM has to fix the game, and this is player has to fight the game mechanics. Right? It's having fun despite of the game, not because of it. Oops. Not because of them. Right? I think they might lose the great player at their table and might never return even for another. Yeah. Yeah, that can definitely happen. Right. It might cause it might cause the frustration to boil over into other aspects, into social aspects or into whatever else, and then people might leave, or there might be fights or whatever, right? Yeah, definitely. It can cause a lot of frustration, and that frustration can then dampen other things. Um, so when you are designing a game, right? So when determine target audience and the type of fun you wish to create, right? And then mechanics that should lead to that type of fun. And again, you cannot account for things like homebrewing. If you say I want to create a game that has this and that type of fun, and you create mechanics that should hopefully lead there, and then a group says, "Oh, this game looks cool. I want to experience exactly the type of fun that the designer is creating or wants me to experience." And then they go and they homebrew the heck out of the game, and then they no longer experience the type of fun that you designed for because they completely changed the game. That's their fault, right? They homebrewed the fun out of the game for themselves. You cannot account for that. You cannot pay attention to that. That's not your responsibility. So don't think about how will people homebrew my game, because that is out of your hands. That is as much out of your hands as how will people play my game. It's essentially the same thing. Homebrewing is a kind of playing the game, right? When you're designing a video game, you cannot account for the fact that some people will try to speedrun it if you are not intentionally designing it for speedrunners as a target audience, right? I know a Minecraft player who built his base so much automation that he practically was obsolete. uh, joke with him that he patched himself out of the game. I mean, at some point, yeah, that's definitely a thing in Minecraft that you can make the gameplay itself. Um, though I think getting there is a kind of fun, and achieving that can also be a kind of fun, definitely. But that is always funny. Yes, that is very true. Um, Sadly for him, he reached it. Welp. It's like the dog chasing the car, and once the dog catches up to the car, it doesn't know what to do with it, or dog chasing the rabbit or something, and it catches the rabbit, and then the dog is like, "What do I do with this now?" Um, Same thing, I guess. So you cannot account for all of the different ways how players might try to play your game. You can only account for the most obvious way to play the game, right? The way your mechanics indicate how how you wish the player to engage with the game. The one job he had was to fill the system sometimes. He puts a coin into the arcade. Yeah. Refill the automation. At some point, maybe even that can be automated. So the job is never done. Um so you can't account for all the ways a player might oops, that is horrible writing. With your game. Only how the again obvious, intuitive, straightforward engagement will play out. So if you are making a shooter game, you expect people who engage with the game on its own terms. Um, that's a good way for players who engage with the game on its own terms. Right? If you make a shooter game where you have to run through levels and such, um, you hope that players will engage with the game in the sense of picking up a gun, going through the level, shooting enemies, and trying to get to the end. Some players might try to do really weird stuff, like jump onto certain walls or try to clip through things or only try to melee enemies or whatever, right? You cannot account for that. If that is fun for them, okay, more power to them. But that is not the straightforward, intuitive interpretation of your work. If your game allows for different kinds of situations, awesome, that's good design. Um, but like engage for your or design for your target audience and for players who will engage with the game on expected terms. If you design a shooter and someone tries to jump on all sorts of walls or jump on enemies and melee them to death, and they are saying, I'm not having fun, then you can rightfully say, well, I never expected you to play the game this way. I designed it for the intuitive, straightforward kind of gameplay. So you are ruining the game for yourself. If someone then says, oh, the gunplay is bad, the hitboxes are weird, the cover system doesn't really work, enemies just run around blindly, playing the shooter game is no fun, then you can say, all right, this person is engaging with the game in the expected manner, the way I designed it for, and they are not having fun because the game is bad. Those are two different things, right? So in the one situation, you can actually say you're playing the game wrong if you're not having fun. In the other, you cannot. They are playing the game correctly, so to speak. Those are horrible terms, but they're playing the game correctly. But the game is bad, that's why they're not having fun. Two completely different things. I suggested that he avoids to automate this because the server is able to automate even this. Oh no. Welp. Mission accomplished then, I guess. Yeah. Hold on. Okay. How long have I been going? Almost 3 hours. I think this is a good breaking point. I think this is a good ending. So look at what kind of fun you want to create. And again, there's a lot of research on different types of fun, on what makes playing games fun, on how we find it, and so on. Then design mechanics that should encourage this type of fun if engaged in their most natural way. And then there's a lot of examples for role-playing games of kinds of mechanics that can encourage play in certain ways. Okay. Ah! Hey, Isaac! Hello, hello. How's it going? Talking about the MDA model? Yes, yes, I am. Or I was talking about it for the last 3 hours. I was slowly winding down, actually. But welcome, welcome. Hold on, let me do this here. So yeah, go check out Isaac as well. Does a lot of cool stuff. Does music production and 3D modeling. I think I've never actually been able to catch any of those streams, but I see a lot of that happening. You do stuff, yes. I think I once had a read about a shooter whose enemy interact with a gun, but all hell broke loose when the player never picked up mentioned gun. Ah, yeah. Those are edge cases. Those are like, yeah, those are very difficult to really navigate both as a designer and as a player. Like, do you want to gate gameplay behind things like this where you force the player into certain actions? Right? What do you do if the player doesn't do those specific actions? The gun was the thing they used to track the player location in the game. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. It can be a good trick. Again, technical things, you have to work within your limitations. And if enemies tracking the position of the gun is easier to program than tracking the position of the player, that can be a really good trick as long as the player doesn't realize that's what's happening and doesn't break the game. But then I would say, yeah, sadly the gun was avoidable. Okay, then something went wrong. If I were to program a game like this and say enemies are tracking the gun to know the position of the player, I would just give the player the gun. The player would have no choice but to have it. Right? If the gun is avoidable and can be picked up and such, then that is something you built into the game and then you have to account for it. Right? Um so there is a fine line between players are playing the game wrong and no, the game actually isn't fun. Right? There is a line, a fine, very blurry, very specific line somewhere there. That is difficult to navigate. Um, no one said game design was easy. Um, but yeah, it's something to think about. That's why you play test. That's why you play test. It was a funny moment because the game developer thought of this interaction. There are lots of ways to play games wrong. There are, yes. There are lots of ways to play games wrong. Um, but if you play the game wrong and it's not fun, you don't get to blame the designer for it. Is the point I'm trying to make here, right? If you play the game wrong and then it ends up not being fun, you don't get to blame the designer. If you're playing the game as expected in its natural way, straightforward, intuitive way, and the game is no fun, then you get to blame the designer. Right? So, speed running, for example, speed running is playing the game wrong in a lot of ways, right? Um, but if the speed running of certain games ends up not being fun, you don't get to blame the designer that you're not having fun speed running this particular game because the game was never intended to be played this way, right? Um, Speedrunning sometimes breaks games fundamentally, yeah, and that can be a lot of fun because you are trying to go for a different goal. You are trying to go for a different play experience. Like, there are a lot of amazing, like, out of bounds and glitch runs of games and such that are very entertaining to watch and probably very entertaining to play. And they completely break apart a game, but they are still fun. It's it's when you are not having fun, but are also not engaging with the game on its own terms, then that you do not get to blame the designer. I was once in a speedrunning stream and their voice was never speedrun a game you love because you learn to hate it. Yes, because you will play it over and over and over and over and over again. Basically. Um, I mean, I guess at some point you just become so good at speedrunning that it like you just approach games in a certain way. And really, I do suggest if you really do like playing games and such, playing video games, I do suggest attempting a speed run, right? Or just getting into the mindset of trying to attempt a speed run. It's very liberating. I've tried so myself. There was a game I just tried speed running once. I did okay, actually, all things considered. Um, but I just tried this mindset of I'm going to speed run this game now. I'm going to try this, and it was quite a bit of fun. But just experiencing this mindset was very liberating and changed how I look at games and gaming in general. For the better, I think. So yeah, share the story that his first speedrun was comfort game, a big bad. Oh yeah. No, 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 no. Do not speedrun a comfort game. That is oof. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, that's rough. That is big rough. Um. So yeah, to come back to the point I was trying to make, when you are designing a game, right? Because we're always looking from the designer perspective and the player perspective, right? If you are designing a game, obviously you have to keep players in mind because that's the whole point. But you also have to keep in mind that there might be some players who will try to break your game, who will try to engage with it differently, who will try to play it quote unquote wrong. But you cannot account for that. You cannot include all of that. You cannot pay attention to it. And it's not your responsibility. Design your game with an expectation of players will probably play it in this way, engage with it in this way, and it needs to be fun in this way. Right? So you cannot take into account everything. The reason for his advice to not speedrun a game you love. Oh, okay. What is the reason? Is that I can also imagine that it breaks the game apart and you start to see it not as a gameplay experience, but as a puzzle box that you have to unravel, which can also change how you look at a game. Definitely. Mm, right. So don't think about all of the homebrewers. Don't think about all of the people who don't engage into the game genuinely because you see all the flaws and lose emotional connection. Yeah. That definitely that one as well. Um, and then when you do have a certain goal in mind for fun, there are many different types of mechanics you can use to try and drive the fun toward that. Um, yeah. So big summary of what we talked about today. Um, yeah, Isaac, I don't think I asked how you're doing. How are you doing? I completely forgot. Was a bit overwhelmed and in the middle of my thoughts. I often look for the game mechanics that support the story I try to tell as a GTM. Yes. Um, so there are some games that are better for running certain types of stories than others. Like D&D is usually not a great choice for playing something like horror because D&D is about very competent, very powerful heroes and horror stories typically aren't or protagonists typically aren't that. Some mechanics are better to help a specific story theme. Yes, definitely. Right. Um System matters. That's a paradigm in RPG design theory. System matters. D&D also has fight focus and over empowerment fantasy. Yes, definitely. Empowerment fantasy is a good word. Yes, it's an empowerment fantasy. Whereas something like Call of Cthulhu, definitely not empowerment fantasy. Very much not. And that's why it makes it better suited to play a horror game where your characters are supposed to be in over their heads and not understanding what they're looking at and what they're working with. Um, yeah. So as a designer, system matters as well. Yeah, horror is disempowerment. Exactly. So again, you can play horror with D&D, but it might not be the best choice, right? The whole a great GM can make a bad game good, and a great player can find fun in an unfun system, and also it's like, yeah. Heard of the Matt Colville system? Um, I have. I mean, I've watched some of his videos. The MCDM, MCGM. game. Matt Colville, blah something. I forget. But yeah, um, I've watched some of his videos where he talks about the design of his game and of like the design process, and it sounds interesting. Um, but then again, Matt Colville very explicitly said that he is creating a heroic fantasy sword and sorcery kind of game like that, which um, leans very heavily into that. Definitely. I haven't seen the system itself yet. I don't know if there's like a quick start or a preview or something floating around. I haven't checked that. Um, but from what I've heard, yes, it goes very much into giving the players options that really matter. And uh, yeah, being a lot more of that heroic sword and sorcery kind of deal. A reason why so few horror games have usable guns in it. Yeah, and that's one of my critiques of the Call of Cthulhu system. Oh, I could fill entire streams of this with just critiques of systems. I think one system I do want to critique at some point, based on all of this, is Shadow of the Demon Lord. Because I've looked at the game, I've read the rules, and I do not understand how that game gets so much praise. I honestly do not understand it. Um, so that would be a game to look at. I would have to look at it again properly, maybe, and then really examine the rules. I don't know the game. Yeah, it is it is a name that kind of floats around as an alternative to D&D every now and then, along the same vein as something like Pathfinder or so. Then you get people suggesting Shadow of the Demon Lord. Um, I don't understand how the game gets praised so much, because to me that I don't see it in the design. German, more the German language space. Yeah, fair, fair. But yeah. Anyway, that's completely different topics. I am done. I have talked for 3 hours. I am done with this topic. This is some great fundamental theory for game design. MDA model. The paper that discusses the MDA model, by the way, is for free. It's like 3 or 4 pages. It's not very long. I hear from more from the dark eye. Yeah. Um, and it goes into some of this as well about like what it means, like looking at game design as a designer versus as a player and such, and it goes into different types of fun that it tries to categorize. So it's an interesting read, and like I said, it's like 3 or 4 pages. It's not a long read, and the PDF is available for free. Maybe like if you go to Wikipedia and you enter MDA model, they might have a link to it somewhere. Um, so definitely worth checking out. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is the biggest German RPG system. So today's D Day with Mercy Monk. Oh, nice. Then I hope you will enjoy your session. Um, okay. Let me switch over to here. All right. Whew. At least I hope it is. Yeah. Scheduling. I feel that as well. Okay. Um, let's see. Let us find out at 7 p.m. Well, then I wish the best for you and hope that your session will indeed happen. Um, let's see who we can raid. we can raid. Ah, okay. So from RPG design to snug. Oh, that's a cute emote. Okay, that's amazing. Let's go raid Lottle and Vix. Who are some pretty cool people, even though it seems like Lottle is asleep right now. But Vix is doing art. Sorry, that's a sneeze. Ow. Um, doing some art right now. But yeah, they're pretty cool people. They do a lot of fun, engaging variety content. Um, and they often stream together as well, so that's a lot of fun to witness. Okay, so let's go say hi to them over there. Okay. Yeah. So that was today's RPG design session. I hope it was educational. I hope you learned a thing or two. I hope it was interesting and entertaining. Um, I will be back Sunday my time with some Baldur's Gate, and hopefully we'll be able to get the scheduling down for our RPG session for some thirsty sword lesbians. It was? Okay, that is good to hear. We've been trying to get scheduling done for that, but there's always something that came up, so maybe, hopefully, we'll get that down. Um, so yeah, that's the plan for the rest of the week. Lot of fix. Okay. Yeah. Thank you all for being here. This was a lot of fun. And I hope to see you all again soon. Say hi to Vix. She's pretty cool. Lotto as well, but Lotto's sleeping, so eh. Um, and yeah, enjoy some awesome art. Take care, and bye bye.